after we talk careers, we've got a wonderful traveler and career coach and many, many more things. Amy M Gardner joining us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go right in. A lot of anxiety, a lot of pay cuts, a lot of businesses dropping, people worried about their jobs, thinking should they switch. You're professionally uh, an expert on this, particularly in the legal field. Talk about what you're advising clients, what you can recommend people to do if they have that anxiety.
Sure. If you're still in your job and you haven't been let go, this is a great time to prepare, to think about what you might like to do if you do end up losing your job, to think about updating your resume, updating your LinkedIn, and reaching out to your network and people who might serve as references for you. Not with any particular ask, but just to reconnect to the people in your network, reconnect with your references, and just make sure you're paying attention to those relationships before you need them, because one of the things we're finding is that in any economy, most jobs are found through networking, or at the very least having someone put in a good word for you about an application that you found or a position you applied to off of, say, LinkedIn or Indeed or something like that. But networking is particularly important in a harder economy. So I would say take those steps. In terms of people who may have, say, lost their jobs, it's really important that you give yourself some time to process. The natural instinct is to apply, 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 and you are obviously better off and better able to do that if your resume and everything is ready. But it's so important that you take a moment to process what you've been through, and give yourself some space to do that. Because if for no other reason, then you will not do as well in interviews if you haven't had the chance to do that. We do have a free download that people can get if you go to resumeredo.com, which is our resume service. And it's called 5.5 Tips to Trash Proof Your Resume. So even if you're in your job right now, go ahead and download that and walk through those steps just so you feel like you have your resume in better shape. And your LinkedIn, especially, this is a great time to get re-engaged on LinkedIn. There are people who put up a profile a long, long time ago and ignored it. So this is a good time to go in and update it. Since you're not commuting or probably traveling much right now, go ahead and update your LinkedIn profile as well.
And LinkedIn, certainly Facebook is emphasizing groups a lot. LinkedIn has a lot of groups that a few years ago I may have clicked yes, join and never been back. Or
Right.
are groups important? Are posting updates, say, in your field of expertise? What,
Mhm.
other than maybe, I think the obvious would be people you know or you want to know, sending them a message. What can you do on the more public LinkedIn tools?
Sure. There are LinkedIn groups. Frankly, I don't know that I've ever been in one that has an active discussion, and I'm in several. I think LinkedIn is really more valuable for staying top of, well, first connecting to people you know so that when they change jobs, you can find them. And
Mhm.
that's really valuable. But also staying top of mind. So if you are in the insurance industry, set a goal for yourself that 2 days a week, I'm going to share some news from my industry. We have people so for our business, Apochromatic, on our LinkedIn profile, every Tuesday, we share a 1-minute video, the Apochrominute, with a career tip. And then every Thursday, we share a blog post. We have people who then just reshare those every week, and
Mm.
that's their activity on LinkedIn. You don't have to be writing a blog post yourself. And in fact, you can be viewed as contributing to your network by sharing, go to HBR, the Harvard Business Review website, find an
Mhm.
article once a week and post it, or find a great TED Talk and post it. So just, you want to get engaged, but you don't have to be on there every single day. You don't have to be doing those ginormous long posts on those one sentence paragraphs again and again and again.
Mm.
Just, maybe try once a week to start, and make sure that you update your picture and your profile, because more people will go to your profile if you start posting on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And other social media, is this the time to take off the travel pictures? Is this the time to maybe adjust your name, or is it? I mean, I know some people in specific industries that use different names or for their, say, Facebook posts, but
Mhm.
I guess at least don't be on Facebook all day if you're being paid to work. Is that?
Right. Not great. I think one thing that people often miss is people assume that if they only share things with their Facebook friends, that the whole world isn't going to see it. You should assume anything you're putting on Facebook is going to be seen by a potential employer. You should assume that any tweet is going to be seen by a potential employer. You should assume that a potential employer is going to find your Instagram pictures. Um, my husband often tells the story that we were on an American flight back from Kauai to LA, I don't know, 5 years ago, and the person behind me threw up. And the flight attendant's response when I went back to the back of the plane, covered in someone else's vomit, was to tell me, "Can't you just get a napkin?" And when we landed, my very helpful husband tweeted an American, like, and he said, "Passenger barfed on my plane, flight attendant response, get a napkin," or something like that.
Yeah.
Are you going to refund our miles? And it
Yeah.
wasn't even a particularly aggressive tweet, but a recruiter for a position called him and said, "Hey, just so you know, our background check found your barf tweet. You want to take that down?" So you do want to be careful with those sorts of things. I definitely see if it depends on your situation and your industry, how authentic you want to be on social media when you're looking for a job. Personally, I think if you have the ability to wait it out and wait for a job where you can be your authentic whole self, you're going to be happier in the long run. But I know that that's not everyone's position. So I would say, do you really want a job where you have to hide the fact that you like to travel? Um, and it really depends on the person's position and industry, and maybe even the country and culture that they're applying in.
What about the digital nomad lifestyle?
Mhm.
It's hard to have a crystal ball about travel and what the world economy is going to look like coming forward, but you're able to be location independent, you and your husband, and are deep in it. Talk about what your prognosis is.
So we spent November in Ecuador, and until maybe a week ago, I belonged to an expat Facebook group for keto.
Hmm.
And I actually quit because I was just getting tons of posts from them right now. But
Hmm.
seeing what their experience of going through COVID-19 has been like, I was very glad that we were not planning on staying beyond the beginning of December,
Hmm.
and that we left when we did. I think a lot of people are probably going to think more carefully. Is this a place I want to be quarantined for 14 days? Is this a
Hmm.
place where I feel comfortable with the healthcare?
Hmm.
And to be clear, I mean, we're based in Chicago. I'm in our condo in Chicago right now. I'm not casting aspersions about anyone's healthcare system. I think many of them have flaws, but I think people are going to think more carefully about those sorts of considerations, at least in the short term, and think about where, if I go to that place, will I be able to get hand sanitizer or medicine or whatever it is. But I certainly hope that long term, that people will feel comfortable going back to doing that, and traveling other places long term. I think for me personally, I've just had a much richer experience when I've been able to stay someplace longer because I've been able to work from there, than when I've been visiting someplace and running from museum to museum, to
Hmm.
squeeze everything in a week.
How do you keep yourself productive? Because I've never gone to that length, but I take trips where I say, "Oh, I'm going to go out for half of the day and then work for half of the
Mhm.
day," and I'm really bad at doing that.
Yeah, it really helps that my husband and I are in business together. And that actually has been really helpful now during the coronavirus, because we've traveled long term together as well, where that's
Mhm.
really the only person you go in knowing. But we will schedule our week around our off time. So when we were in Ecuador, for example, we would basically say we're going to work 4 days during the week, and then there's one weekday we're going to take off, so it's not so crowded, and then on the weekend we would take off. But on Saturday night we might be working on a blog post to go out for the next week. We have that flexibility. We also have the advantage with career coaching. Our clients can schedule their calls whenever works for us. So it might be that they want to do a call on Monday night, but you don't have any calls Monday during the day, so you just got to be back to the Airbnb by 5 or whatever. So we have that advantage, but I think it's really important to go in with a plan and just know that sometimes you have to be flexible. We also I'm particularly really disciplined about using airplane time. And sometimes
Hmm.
I make a decision like on this plane, my goal is to sleep. And fine. But otherwise I try to go in knowing this is what I'm going to try to get done on this flight.
I'm the opposite. I've given up working on flights. I just
Yeah.
if I'm in a seat nice enough to work, then I don't want to work, and if I'm
Right.
in the other kind of seat, I can't even open my 12-inch laptop.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I'll do a lot of times I will end up writing out blog posts longhand, or I will
Mhm.
review resumes, like longhand, print out a copy somewhere and then review it for someone. Yeah, it definitely, there are certain times where it's a lot easier to work than others. And there are times where I'll just decide, because I always set a reading goal every year for how many books I want to read. So I
Oh,
might decide like, okay, my plan for this flight is half sleep, half read, and fine.
I need your discipline. I've tried to get back into a good reading goal because
Uh,
I read so much online or news
oh,
that I'm reading much less of the stuff. When I started my travel days in China, I would go to the foreign language bookstore and get
uh,
some classic novels and read those on the trip, and then the
yeah.
internet ruined me.
So you know what I often do is I'll go to the bookstore, like the bookstore in the airport, and I'll look for the top, the top books in top Hungarian books, and then I'll go to the English section and see which of those top 10 they have in English, and then I'll
Oh,
buy that. But right now I've been reading a lot of books about people who've escaped North Korea. Not necessarily light reading, but I've been reading a lot of those. I'll get into a groove of reading about a certain place and read a bunch of books back to back. But you should use Goodreads. If you use Goodreads, it'll stress you out about how far behind you are in your reading goal, and that'll make you read.
it sounds like Everett Tyler Cowen, the economist, talk about reading very deep on a subject, and that if you think that your fourth or fifth or 10th or 20th book on a subject wouldn't add more to knowledge, he's argued that it maybe does. It's maybe the 20th that gives you the
Yeah,
most insight. So,
yeah,
it, it,
maybe.
it,
Yeah.
is there's a North Korea interest? Have you've traveled to the country or
So
interested?
we've only been to the DMZ, like every American tourist who goes
Yeah.
to South Korea. But I find it really fascinating. We were standing at the there's that overlook in the DMZ where you can look down into North Korea, and there was this man riding his bicycle by, and I thought, does he know we're standing here staring at him?
Mm.
And what is he going home to? Like, what is that like? So I've always been really interested in North Korea, but I go through these things. I had uh, I'll have times where, especially before a trip to Cuba, I'll read. I always listen to Donald Sutherland reading Old Man and the Sea on Audible on the
Oh,
flight every single time.
oh wow.
Um, so I have all these. I'll try to reread books and things like that.
That must be it. Him reading that must be trippy.
It's amazing. Yeah,
I'm,
it's really good.
that I will have to experience on a flight. And you mentioned Cuba, so it's a country you've been to a number of times and even set up a business taking group. So talk about first, somebody wants to start up a travel agency. What does
Mhm.
that look like?
Right now, good luck with that. But for us, it's always been a side interest. So what happened was I was the dean of students at a law school, and I planned a trip. I created an international immersion program so that students could go to a foreign country for 2 weeks over their spring break, and have it was based on a fellowship I had done. And the idea was that they would meet with government leaders and business leaders and lawyers and alumni, things like that. So students knew that I had been to Cuba a couple times, and on the survey had asked for Cuba. So I set up a trip to Cuba. I was not going to go on it. I was actually on crutches, and some things fell through. And all of a sudden, my boss was saying, "Well, I guess you're going to Cuba." And I said, "Well, I'm on crutches." And he said, "Well, I guess your husband's going to Cuba with you." So we led this trip to Cuba, and I made a Facebook post from the airport or something saying that we were doing this, and people said, "Oh, I want to go too." And so we came back and said, well, why don't we just organize one trip? And so we organized a trip for some friends, took like 12 people down there, and then it became this small business. So we organize private trips we don't go on, and then we lead these small group trips down there. Usually anywhere from 6 to 12 travelers. Some of our itineraries are more photography focused, and others are just more cultural focused. But it's a place that I think we need more Americans to visit Cuba and have more relationships between Cubans and Americans. And it happens to be a place that I really love to visit. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of politics I could go to there, but
right.
well,
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. We've had people, Cuban Americans, visit with us who they've asked their fellow travelers to not post their picture on Facebook because they don't want their Cuban grandma to find out that they went.
mm,
So I certainly appreciate that it's a complicated situation and there's a lot of strong views.
I lived in Miami and worked for a time,
Mm,
and those strong views just would appear at my
yeah.
office desk, my anywhere in all range of it. It was interesting. I remember because I had just moved back from China and I was hired with this company to help them set up a presence in China. And like
Mm,
one guy think as a baby he had come from Cuba, and he looked at me and he said, what's it like to live in a communist country?" And I
Mm-hmm.
said, China is so different from what you may be imagining that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the reference point, but the company I was working at, which had nothing to do with Cuba, had a kindergarten for employee kids, had a fitness center, had a gym. I said, this office feels more communist than my experience in China ever did, because you had three
Wow.
generations of families working together there. It was a great cultural experience to
Yeah.
pick that
Wow.
up. So you introduced me to Hershey, Cuba, which I said
Uh,
is that Hershey the same one I'm thinking of?
yeah. So the same Hershey went to Cuba, and he wanted to create a sugar plantation there. So he built this company town, and it was very much modeled on Hershey, Pennsylvania. And the town is still there under a different name now. But you can take a train, which is not reliable and not particularly recommended, or it's just a short drive from Havana. It's a great day trip. We were the first company actually to start taking our groups there. And what happened was my husband got interested in it. He found it on the internet. So on one of our scouting trips in August a few years ago, we went down to Hershey, and the because they don't get other visitors, it's not you don't see buses there. And we were actually just there with a driver and our guide in a small car, but we were walking up and down the streets, and people are looking out the curtains at us. And finally, my husband just walked up to a house, and the owner, Carlos, came out, and he's this very large man, late 60s, early 70s. And he doesn't speak English, and Keith doesn't speak much Spanish. So I kind of ran over to to help and translate a little. And ever since then, we try to take our groups to Hershey just to get them off the tourist trail and have very different experience. But
Mhm.
every time we see Carlos, he has a very sweaty hug for each of us. And last time we were there, we always take him gifts, and he always tells us not to. And last time we were there, he took a grocery bag and filled it with avocados from his tree. And our male guide afterwards, he was fighting back tears. And he said it was really beautiful because we gave Carlos what we have, and Carlos gave us what he has.
Mm.
And what he has happens to be this avocado tree. So Hershey's a really special place where you're not going to see a bunch of tourists. There's a snack bar essentially. So you're not going to find a restaurant, you're not going to find a gas station, you're not going to find public restrooms. But it's definitely I think a really interesting place to visit. Very different than Havana.
And talk about the different regions of Cuba for let's say, very strong-willed, independent
Mm-hmm.
travelers that want to see a lot, want to, as you say, go beyond places that tourists typically see. It's a much bigger country, I think, than
Mm-hmm.
many would imagine in terms of driving time. I don't know if you've taken the drive from one end to the other, but I understand it would be in the days. I've taken a road trip, but more in the middle of the country. So, what's the what's the behind the scenes of behind going even deeper?
Sure. So you can go to the Isle of Youth. That you have to fly there, or you can take a ferry to the Isle of Youth, and that is where the prison where Fidel Castro was held and the other revolutionaries were held. It's
Mm.
there. There's also amazing scuba diving there, and that's a really unique experience. Um, a little more manageable is if you go to Baracoa, which is on the far eastern edge of Cuba. It's where Columbus landed when he visited Cuba, and it's basically a large. It was a small fishing village, and now it's a larger town, but very, very different. The food is different, the music is different, everything is different than you find in Havana. I think it's just important if you're going to Cuba to make sure you don't spend all your time in Havana. If you're a first time visitor to Cuba, of course, you want to go to Havana to feel like you've had the full experience.
Hmm.
But I think it's really important to get outside that so that you can interact with more local people. Often we have groups that really love Santiago de Cuba, which is there's a lot of revolutionary history there.
Mm.
But we've never had a group that didn't love Baracoa. And
Mm.
I think that that's a particularly interesting place to go if you can. And of course, a lot of people like going to Trinidad. So if you're trying to stay closer to Havana,
Mhm.
Trinidad is this beautiful 500-year-old city. that's really a colonial style architecture and really known for the music and dance there, and the pottery. So you can have a really rich experience staying closer to Havana, but you just want to make sure that even if it's just for day trips, you get outside Havana.
And I particularly think I feel like it's Madrid with moss. I love the Havana, the green color of it looks great. The road trip I took was, as I said, a little more limited in scope, but down to Trinidad, Cienfuego, and then the Bay of Pigs, which I found particularly interesting, where they have so many markers wherever one of their fighters or a citizen died, they put a marker, so you'll just suddenly see them on somebody's lawn or something. It's a very startling, wrenching experience of what fighting actually looks like to just see these markers in people's yards. So
it's such a juxtaposition too when you see how clear the water is there and how beautiful it is. I mean, it's the stuff of postcards, and then you when you understand more about the history, it's definitely different, or definitely big contrast.
talk about Cuba as a beach destination. I think that probably everybody but Americans that visits Cuba is more aware of the beach aspects, and Americans that are fixated on some of the political history.
Yeah. So we've stayed at beach resorts only because we needed housing in a particular region of the island, which has been helpful, but I wouldn't recommend it. If you're used to, say, resorts in Mexico, I wouldn't recommend Cuba as a beach destination. There were some Canadians we met at the one resort we stayed at, and this is obviously not a reflection on all Canadians, but I met one particularly sunburned drunk woman, and I asked her, I said, well, how long are you here for? And she said, 10 days. She said, I come here every year for 10 days. And I said, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, where do you go? And she said, oh, we stay here. And I said, again, like, that's all you do? And she said, yeah. I said, why? And she said, because the food is so terrible, I lose a lot of weight. And the alcohol is free. It's all included. So there are definitely, nice places to stay all over Cuba, but you have to be more adventurous. But I would just say, a place that's nice by the standards there is not going to be, the same as what you might expect if you were going to, Florida or something. But there are beautiful beaches, and many of them, I think what you can do is if you go to Trinidad, say, you can hire a taxi or rent a bike and just go to the beach for a couple hours as a break at the end of the day and have that piece of the experience. But legally, I think it's very tricky how long you're really supposed to be able to spend at the beach. And our travelers are so much more focused on the culture and photography and stuff that for us, it's usually, okay, there's a couple hours free. If you'd like to do this, this is how to do it.
How about the classic cars? Do you get people that are fascinated by the cars?
Yeah. So there's a couple that we've met actually in Havana who they are well known now for really restoring the classic cars correctly. For a long time, they refused to have convertibles because so many of the convertibles there have just had the top chopped off. They weren't really convertibles. And they started off, basically, he started off as a driver and built his way up to be able to buy one car and buy a second car. And now they supplied the cars when the embassy was reopened and all the dignitaries from the US went down and for the Obama's visit. So they're known for doing things the right way. They've actually invented some parts so that to replace parts that they just can't get in Cuba. They've been brought to the State Department to advise business owners in the US. They've been brought to GM in Detroit to advise them. So really like lovely people that we've run into randomly as we've traveled around Cuba. So just great people. Definitely are the classic cars. There are a lot more modern cars now than there used to be. We started going in 2013 and the transformation is pretty stark, but you certainly can still ride in the classic cars. And I think it's more fun if you're looking for a taxi to ride in one of the locals taxis that is not the restored car, but is just an old car. So you can ride in really all kinds of old cars in Cuba.
Ben Sand in the comments, he ran into your Canadian friends on on his visit too. So
and again, like many Canadians are lovely people who are not drinking, blah, 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 blah. But yeah.
they can take some abuse. They've got a functioning healthcare system and all that, so
Yeah.
we can have some fun with them. But, uh, talk about another of your favorites, Peru, that you've been repeatedly.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first time we went to Peru, we were only there, I want to say a week and a half, 2 weeks. And we did the very typical um, get to Cusco, get out as quickly as you can so you don't have to deal with the altitude, stay in the Sacred Valley, go on to Aguas Calientes, go to Machu Picchu, back to Cusco, and then fly to Lima. And we actually stayed in Lima about a week because we found it was a great place to work from. Fast internet, inexpensive lodgings, great restaurants. And so the second time that we went in May or June of this past year, we stayed more like 3 weeks. And part of that was a longer stay in the Sacred Valley. And while we were there, we did a number of day trips. We found this driver on our first visit, Ramon, who we kept in touch with and who drove us around the second time. And he's very tolerant. My husband likes to just decide he wants to stop and take a picture.
Mm.
And Ramon was very into that. He especially wanted to take pictures of some of the potato farmers we were seeing, and Ramon would hop out and translate, and he's wonderful. So we got to do more of those things. My mother-in-law is really into quilting, and she wanted to visit one of the weaving collectives, and I didn't want to visit a weaving collective that had, tour bus parking. So I found a small one that normally doesn't have English translators, and then they hired an English translator for us for the day. And so we were the only tourists there. They greeted us with a drum and flute, and
Mm.
we had to wear like the local clothing and then go into the fields with some of the weaving women and pick out the herbs that they were going to use to dye the wool, which then they went back and sheared a sheep. And we got to see the whole process go through, and they fed us this really nice lunch. And it was a really nice experience that I don't think it would have been quite the same if, there'd been another group of 40 people there. But instead, it was just my husband and mother-in-law and me for the day, and our translator. So it was a really a neat thing to do. We also, when we were in Aguas Calientes this time, we stayed 2 nights, which enabled us to not have to rush at Machu Picchu to make our train. And then we could also go to the Machu Picchu museum, which is interesting, and to the butterfly sanctuary there. So we kind of stretched it out and then spent more time in Lima this time around too.
And certainly, if Cuba's encouraging some tourists to lose weight, I think Peru encourages all of us to
Yeah,
gain weight.
yeah. There's such
Just
amazing restaurants.
yeah, I just yeah, as I said, even the fruits, I gained 50 pounds in a week, so I don't think I can do the long term stay. But
I pretty much ate my weight in ceviche, I think. So
I forgot to ask in terms of the travel agency, the actual mechanics of it. So you have a legal background.
mhm.
Some of us might feel like, oh, it'd be fun to put together a trip for our friends, but that's a lot different
Mhm.
than setting up
Oh
an
yeah,
agency. I mean, as I
yeah.
understand in the U.S., it's not just national; it's very specific to states and what customers. But what does that look like in terms of the legal processes, liability, if somebody wants to get into doing occasional trips and
Mhm.
formalize?
Yeah, so I think I would just recommend there is oh gosh, do you remember there was a guy at TravelCon who actually he helps people go from leading day trips or like guiding walks around their town to doing larger trips. I
Hmm.
would recommend that you work with someone who knows what they're doing essentially.
Hmm.
I mean, we've traveled with friends before. When we renewed our wedding vows, I think we had 15 people who went to Kauai with us. And so we had
Hmm.
organized that kind of trip before and had organized lots of trips where we took our parents with us. So we had some experience learning, like, oh, this is how often you have to have bathroom breaks, and this is how many hours you can expect people to actually go for a day.
Hmm.
Um, and I had organized trips for law students before to places that I hadn't been. So we had all that to draw on. But I would say you want to work with a travel agency or someone who has things set up and already has connections, particularly until you build up connections and to deal with all the back and forth. I mean, there's just so much to be aware of, and then you definitely want to make sure you have an insurance policy and think through anything that can go wrong because something will go wrong, and then you'll be prepared for it. Um, I mentioned earlier, we had a bus breakdown one time, and it ended up being this great travel memory. But in that moment, you will feel much better if you know you have 5 people to call, and some of them are there, some of them are in the US, you know what to do, you have insurance, than if you haven't thought those things through. And it's just so important that you make sure that even on that first trip you do, that everyone has a wonderful experience. So I would say if people are interested in that, they can definitely reach out and happy to talk with them. But you really want to work with somebody who has done this before.
Speaking of work with somebody, you've made reference to working with your husband on your
Mhm.
businesses.
Yeah.
That's clearly not for every relationship.
No.
Uh, I think even your blog, which I'll share the link,
Oh,
the red dot blue dot. So
yeah.
I'm getting the feeling that your husband is the red blog and you are the blue blog.
Yeah. Yeah. So Keith shares his photography on the red blog, and then I write about our travel experiences on the blue blog. Although certainly we haven't been super active on that since we can't travel. Um, but yeah, we actually worked together in the dish room in college, and I think
Hmm.
that really laid the foundation for being able to work together as adults later on. One thing that we found is it's important that we each have our own lane. So Keith does all of the like the back end stuff for our business. I have no idea how to put up the website. I have no idea how to do a significant portion of the things he does, and he doesn't have an idea how to do a significant portion of the things that I do. And having that, each having our areas of control is really important. And we certainly accept opinions from the other on it, but he's the final arbiter of certain things, and I'm the final arbiter of other things. um, I think that traveling together has made it much easier for us to be able to be quarantined together,
Hmm.
for sure.
Right.
And I think if we didn't work together, it was much harder when we both had normal jobs, to make our vacation schedules match up. Particularly, I was the dean of students at a law school, and so my schedule was different. He was the city manager for a suburb of Chicago, so having
Hmm.
vacation schedules, those sorts of things were much harder. And now we can say we're not taking, so we do trainings at law firms and other employers, as well as coaching people one-on-one, running masterminds, having an online course, and having a resume business. So there's all these different pieces of it. But we can say, all right, this last week in June, we're not taking anything, because we're going to travel. And then, for the next 3 weeks in July, we'll only work these 4 days or whatever it is, right? We can figure it out. And so it gives you a lot more ability to travel. But it has its moments. So.
And Jorge's asking, could you talk a bit about you and your husband's travels leading groups of photographers?
Sure. So we take some of our Cuba trips are very much photography focused. For some of those, we partner with a camera dealer here in Chicago, the Leica dealer in Chicago, Tamarkin Camera, America's premier Leica dealer. So Dan Tamarkin goes on some of those trips with us, but then we'll have other trips that Dan isn't on where Keith will lead, say, photo walks and reviews, things like that. We always try to avoid being a photo workshop, because our theory is you spend a lot of money to get someplace. Um, we can talk about your pictures when we get back in terms of sitting in a dark room, putting pictures up, that kind of thing. But our trips to Cuba usually have a photography bent. There's a famous American Cuban photographer, Roberto Salas, who we take our groups to see. There are local Cuban photographers that we often work with on some of the excursions and things that we do. So our Cuba trips definitely do that. And we've had people ask us about doing other trips to other places under the red dot, blue dot, which is our photography and travel blog, under that umbrella, and have been pretty close to doing some of those trips. And then we were getting close to announcing a couple of those trips, and then all of this happened. So we'll see. But having been on some great guided trips and having been on some guided trips that could use some work, um, I I really love helping people getting to see a place through their eyes, and also helping them avoid the mistakes and just have a wonderful experience.
And for somebody who's pretty ignorant on photography, I'm aware that Leica has huge fans, and I'm also aware of the price tags, and I
Mm,
don't know
yeah.
anything beyond that. So
Oh,
why Leica?
so they are amazing, wonderful cameras. But that said, I would say that on one of our trips, we'll often have a spouse who's really into photography, and then a spouse who's like, I'm using my iPhone, I'm not interested in that. Where's the mojito?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, So we definitely have a mix, even on the photography bent trips. I use a Leica, but it's like basically the point and shoot Leica.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely have people who we have one person who started off using her phone, and now she's been to Cuba with us a few times, and now she uses a Panasonic camera. So
Mm.
she's moved up as she's gotten more interested in it. But they're amazing cameras. That are made in Germany. We've gotten to go to the Leica factory actually in Wetzlar, Germany. And my husband is on the board of the International Leica Society. So lots of Leica, but as long as I do believe the line that the best camera for you is the one you're going to have with you, and
Mm.
that's what matters. So,
Is that factory visit open to the public, or is this because you're?
yeah. So we got to go on a pretty amazing experience actually because of the Leica conference. But you can, well before he was on the board, we rented a car and a long layover and drove from Frankfurt to Wetzlar. You can walk through and see them making the cameras through the glass, and they
Mm.
have a museum and all kinds of stuff. So it's a pretty neat place to visit.
Another question: what is the most difficult place you have ever tried to actually accomplish work?
Oh, so it's always the places that you're sure are going to be easy. So Abu Dhabi, we were
Oh, where they
like
block
totally,
all the VIP stuff and.
yeah, totally modern, wonderful place, right? And we were at the Hilton, and it was they had this crazy deal because it was July, and you could basically have 3 meals a day in the lounge. They have this amazing pool, blah blah blah, and the internet would just not work for like 4 hours. So that was a little stressful. On the other hand, places like Tbilisi, Georgia, amazing internet. No problems there. I would say Japan was really hard to work because you didn't want to, well, because of the time difference and because you didn't want to work because it's not a cheap place to hang out extra days so that you can work. But we did also take a 7-hour train ride once between Kiev and Odessa with the express plan of working on the train, which Keith actually wrote a blog post about the train. I would say it's probably the worst train ride I'd ever been on. So that was a more difficult place uh, to work. So I would not recommend. I do think it gives you a great experience to ride the train in any country, and Keith is really into trains, especially. He's gotten to drive a couple trains on some of our trips, but yeah, I don't recommend the Ukrainian train if you're looking for a work outlet.
Do you recommend Odessa?
I ended up loving Odessa. What happened was through this fellowship I mentioned through the German Marshall Fund, we had actually hosted for dinner a woman from Odessa. And she had always said, if you
Mm.
get back to Odessa, let me know. And I was like, okay. And then we were in Kiev, mainly because Keith wanted to go to Chernobyl. We posted on our blog, where should we go next? And the blog readers picked Odessa. And
Mm.
so I messaged Hannah and was like, hey, we're going to be there. It was really interesting, an interesting place to go. But if you do go to Odessa, just know that you are not going to find a coin laundry or really any place to get your laundry done. And so you want to have it done in Kiev or wherever your destination is after Odessa, because there's no place to get your laundry done unless you pay the exorbitant prices at the hotel.
You're talking about the internet. Yeah, when I was traveling around Greece, I stayed at all these little mom and pops, 20 euros a night, whatever, and perfect internet. And I was going to do this podcast interview, an episode for Amateur Traveler. And I said, schedule it for this day because I'll be at an intercontinental hotel in Athens. Of course, the internet was atrocious. Then they put me in the business center, and there's like a wedding next door to it. And it's like, I'm sorry,
Always the way it is.
I waited to the 4 or 5 star hotel that was on a points deal, and I should have done the mom and pop
Yeah, I
internet.
would say the internet in Aguascalientes is horrible, but you're not there for the internet, right? You're there to go to Machu Picchu, so
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, you definitely would expect that in Intercontinental you would have decent internet. And yeah, we do have a Kiesel that we travel with that makes it so that we can have internet too. But
Mm.
yeah, for just a casual person, I think it's really helpful to check with groups like Every Passport Stamp to see, what people's experience has been like different places, so that you can go. And I also will go on TripAdvisor and just search internet in the hotel or
Yeah, yeah. I
whatever
search internet
recommendation.
and I search parking. Those are the two that I
Yeah,
always look for.
yeah, Wi-Fi or whatever. Yeah, because otherwise it can be. I also always try to have a backup plan. It's traveling a lot has really helped us, or helped me at least, stop procrastinating because you
Mm.
can't count on you're going to get something done on the flight, because that's when the big recliner person is going to be in front of you.
Mhm. Mhm.
You can't count on the internet always working. So it's really helped me to move tasks up so that if I'm getting ready for a presentation, I'm never the person who's like cranking to get the slides done at the last second if I'm traveling, because who knows what's going to happen. And we've done webinars for clients from all over the world, and it's always worked out, but it always can be a little a little stressful.
Yeah, I just think even the tool I'm using to the live cast, we have a guest tomorrow who's dialing in from Afghanistan, and it's like it's not
Wow.
working, it's not working. But I applied, I don't know, they probably have Chinese telecom equipment or whatever, and I applied my China experience, and I said, "Do you have a VPN?" And yes,
Mhm.
okay, and then it immediately, because this tool requires either a Facebook or Google sign in, and so the test worked that way. But those kind of things you pick up along the way.
Yep.
Um,
You
there's a
got to
lot of
count
groups
on.
like the business of blogging, or you mentioned the TravelCon conference that
Mhm.
Nomadic Matt runs that we were at in Boston last year. And it seems maybe people starting out obsess about two questions that are probably irrelevant for a long time in their progression, but taxes and legal structure, and
Mhm.
and they're often intertwined. But we're not asking you to give. You're
Right.
not our lawyer, and you can't
Right.
give actual legal advice. But what are some of the considerations that somebody that's serious about building a travel blogging business will say? What are the things they should take a hard look at and understand, and what are the things that are just not so important?
So one thing I think that people often overlook is their intellectual property from the very beginning, and getting a trademark for whatever their name is. And I think that that can be premature if, a lot of people start a travel blog, right? I mean, if you look at our blog, we post a lot more when we're traveling, and we've been home, and our business, Apochromatic, has been really busy this entire time. So we haven't posted anything in quite a while.
Mhm.
But if you really are serious about doing this long term, you want to make sure that you protect your name and your trademark, so that you have that. You also want to make sure you aren't going to get in trouble with taxes, and that if, heaven forbid, the blog gets sued, you don't want to also be able to get sued. So you do want to have that separation set up. For us, because we have a Cuba business, we make sure that everything is very, very separate. Everything is incorporated separately, and you spend more money on. I mean, I was an IP litigator. I was a partner at a law firm, and I had somebody else do our trademark applications.
Mhm.
I practiced law for a long, long time. I had someone else set up all of our LLCs. So I recommend, even if you are bartering with somebody else, but you get someone who knows what they're doing and that they set everything up correctly, because it's going to save you time. And I think it's also really important that you get insurance and have an insurance policy, whether that's health insurance for you so that you can be medevaced home so you don't lose all your money,
Mhm.
and go into huge debt, or also making sure that you have an insurance policy for your business. It is so much less money than you think it's going to be. And it's just, you're buying peace of mind.
And insurance policy for your business, that could mean a lot of things. Are there specific keywords that you're looking for types of coverage?
So you definitely would want to ask your insurance agent, but uh, we have to have a policy for our Cuba business, and basically, it ended up being so much less than I expected, that then we made sure we have everything. Everything has insurance. But if you talk to, um, your normal insurance agent, they probably can refer you. There's a guy who lives in our building named Jared Rummel who has an insurance agency. And Jared, we've emailed him before from the Miami hotel, and said, the hotel in Miami, and said, "Oh my gosh, we're leaving tomorrow. We forgot to tell you." And he's done some wizardry and sent us an updated policy. So you just want to have an insurance policy that is going to give you that comfort. And two, for the travel insurance, I had to have a doctor come to our hotel room in the middle of the night in Peru. I
Hmm.
was really sick 2 years ago, and it wasn't even enough money to turn it into the travel insurance. So
Yeah.
I'm certainly not saying it was like $70 for a doctor and a nurse and a
Yeah.
runner with the prescriptions and 3 prescriptions.
Mhm.
So we didn't even bother. But just knowing that you have that, I once had to help arrange a medevac for someone from Tanzania to Nairobi,
Mhm.
and it is not cheap. So you want to make sure you have that protection.
Yeah, and even as you said, the amount might be small. I've had an annual travel medical policy, and for years I never, fortunately, never had case to use it. And 2019 19 in Hong Kong, a trip between Hong Kong and Japan. It was flu-like type stuff, and I just wasn't getting better, and it was a couple weeks, and it was just when you're sick, you just don't want to be dealing with that stuff. And that the insurance had direct bill. I never even had to look at a receipt or paperwork or pay up front. It just went to the clinics that they had, and it's just when you're sick, that's so much better to have that experience, especially in a country where you don't know how to navigate the system, or you make a big upfront payment and you're not sure what it's what the process is going to look like. That was a great thing, even for something that like your Peru wouldn't have necessarily cost that much money wise. It was just simpler and easier to deal with that way.
And just knowing that I had it, and so that when the hotel said, okay, they'll be there in an hour, I didn't have to worry about it.
Hmm. And we haven't talked about points, so
Oh,
you're a professional, and you also are into the points hobby. So that's one I'm guilty as charged as well. And I think you can communicate it to the EPS crowd much better than I can. So talk about whether it's your around the world trip or any aspect that people that say, I don't want to bother with frequent flyer programs, it's too complicated. What can you do to sell them on dabbling a little bit?
So, and I should say, I used to be really, really good at miles and points. My husband and I actually did a safari back when Hilton had a safari package. We did that safari package that I only learned about because of what's the group, um, the board, the forum.
A flyer talk.
Yes, there we go. I only learned about it because of Flyer Talk, and did some fake hotel stays at a Las Vegas not Hilton Garden, Las Vegas Hampton Inn or something that then got me the points.
By fake, you mean you paid for them, you were checked in, but you didn't need to stay. So
Right, you just had to call the manager or something.
yeah.
So this was, a long time ago, and I was really good at it, and then got to be much less good at it. But in 2018, when we decided, okay, we're going to do this round the world trip, it was like, with what trust fund? I mean, no. And then I looked at our balances and thought, oh, actually, the miles and points were still sitting there, because we had always thought maybe we'd travel for a year, and I used that justification to get my husband to go do all those silly gift cards and stuff. Remember the cards back at Walgreens?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had done those things. So we had the points sitting there. But when we were thinking about flying around the world and knowing we would need to work part of the time, I told my husband, I don't want to be in coach for 10 hours. And I mean, I'm 5'5". Like I can handle coach for 10 hours, but that doesn't mean I want to. So we were able, fortunately, even on short notice, to use points to be able to fly business or first class and all of our long flights for around the world trip. When on a week and a half notice, we needed to get from Odessa to Washington, D.C., and then back to Spain 48 hours later, we were able to book all of that on business on American Airlines. So we had to fly Odessa to Frankfurt in like Ukrainian Air or something. But for me, the miles and points have been enabled us to take family and friends with us places on trips, and to just have nicer places to stay. I mean, we stayed at the Marriott in Cusco, and because I'm platinum, largely because of the Marriott credit card, they did our laundry for free. We had a 2-bedroom suite, and so did my mother-in-law. So just some of these things just make your experience so much richer. And that said, I've also stayed in $20 a night Airbnbs, but being able to mix it up, especially if you're doing long-term travel, if you have a night or two where you can go to a place with a really nice pool and sit in air conditioning that's going to work, it can make the more rustic accommodations more worthwhile. One time we took after we took our trip to Africa, actually, we then took my dad, mother-in-law, and father-in-law back to Africa with us in business class, all of us. And I had a spreadsheet where I kept calling American Airlines, yelling agent in the phone. I called them every day for, I want to say, like 50 some days or something to get all these tickets. And we walked into the lounge at Heathrow, into the British Airways lounge. And my dad looked at me and he goes, is this all free? And he was just so amazed, right? And it was just, I think sometimes you can get spoiled if you have these benefits, but being able to see, like, actually, this is not normal. This is pretty amazing sometimes. really makes the, writing out Post-it notes for my husband about what credit card he should be using right now, worth it. But I think if you put anything on a credit card, you might as well get miles for it. So even if all you do is just get one miles credit card and put everything on it, by the end of the year, you will have for sure enough points for a plane ticket. And you might have enough points because of the sign up bonus, but you might have enough points for 2 plane tickets. And
Hmm.
who wouldn't want 2 free plane tickets for the $95 annual fee? So I think it's really, you can go crazy and have thousands of dollars in fees and do all that stuff. But if you just get like the Chase Sapphire Preferred and maybe the card for the airline that you prefer, you really can end up flying for free. I mean, my dad lives in Iowa and it's a 12-hour round trip drive. Or a lot of times I can book the morning flight from Chicago to Des Moines and then the last flight back from Des Moines to Chicago for 7,500 miles.
Mm.
So I spend as much time with him as I would otherwise spend in the car, can do a 1 day trip, and I do it for 7,500 miles. So it makes a lot of things possible. So even if you don't want to have the spreadsheet and the crazy, just get the card.
Yeah. And that would be 7,500 miles might be the equivalent of like $75, $100,
Yeah.
125, and those. I mean,
And
and a
the
lot of those
tickets are,
regional U.S. flights, that's probably $400 or $500 a lot of
yeah,
days.
it's crazy. Yeah, it's like $359 is usually the cheapest for the plane ticket otherwise. So
My brother lives in Iowa City, so I'm used to figuring out Moline, Quad Cities, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines. They're all expensive and all
yeah.
difficult, but I know the area, and yeah, and you talked about the spontaneity, and I think that's one that
Yeah.
a lot of the travelers in EPS maybe don't appreciate as much, that having the miles allows you to often do things at very last minute. The travelers that don't want to be confined to a schedule, but suddenly wake up and they want to fly here, and the cash ticket is crazy price we have bought in advance. With a lot of the mileage programs, it doesn't go up in that way. It may not be available, but it doesn't necessarily skyrocket in price the way cash tickets do.
Absolutely. And if you do like the Chase Sapphire Preferred, you can use those points for United. And then we also do American Airlines. So that gives us two options. But when we did our round the world trip, because we had a really short time I was wrapping up my job and my husband had just gone full time on our business and doing all these things. We didn't have a ton of time to plan. So we had certain tickets purchased, but others we were buying as we went, and hotels we were booking as we went. And I mean, we were very fortunate, but if you're trying to book, spring break week to Kauai, it's going to be harder.
Hmm.
But otherwise, if you're trying to go a lot of places in the world, and if you have some flexibility, then we don't usually have a lot of problems last minute, except again, like if it's over Christmas or something, then it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, people are surprised. They say Ethiopian Airlines has the best award availability of any airlines. I've flown them, I don't know, 40 times, and I've never once not gotten a seat that I wanted. So, I mean, I'm often flying in economy, but
Yeah, but I mean,
just having it on demand is incredible.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. Like I used to do a lot of business travel on Southwest until like 2 months ago. But we fly Southwest a lot because if clients hire us both to come in and do a presentation, a workshop, or do something, then most years we have the companion pass, so they only have to pay for one plane ticket. But with Southwest, if you're just flying within the US and you're coming in and out of Southwest hubs, it's great because you can cancel, I think it's 10 minutes before, 20 minutes before. You get all the money back in Southwest credit. I mean, it's super duper flexible, whether you're using points or cash. So I think sometimes people assume that all airlines have the same rules as the legacy carriers, and fortunately they just don't.
Hmm. And we're seeing that right now with the virus stuff, that
Mhm.
everybody seems like they have a good customer friendly policy. And then you start peeling it back and you realize that some are really, really twisting the meaning of the language that they're using.
Yeah.
And
Although I have to say, people were griping about Marriott in some of the travel groups, and I canceled a certificate redemption that you get the certificates with the credit cards,
Mhm.
and it didn't redeposit automatically. And I thought, oh, this is going to be horrible. This is going to take an hour. And when I called them, I was on the phone. I was on hold for maybe 8 minutes while someone got a supervisor. And the supervisor starts off the conversation saying, "Hey, Amy, I'm going to make sure we get this redeposited for you, but it's going to take me a minute." I mean, there was
Mhm.
no arguing. She just made it go. And she was
Not
just
even
so
the
firm about
supervisor says, "Now, what are you calling about?" Like they didn't get the
it.
message.
Yeah. So I had a really great experience with them for that. But yeah, some of the um, uh, hotel chains and airlines, I think, are being a lot less flexible than others.
And it's tough stuff for the employees there. So it sounds like Amy was very cheerful when calling, and that probably helped.
Probably. Yeah. Gosh, I used to, I had plenty of jobs that were not so glamorous and fun. And so I always feel like, I spent every summer in high school and college working in a water park in the Wisconsin Dells. Yeah. So, and I waited tables at
Were you up to your
Houlihan.
ankles in water at the top of a slide, or what? What
Oh
were you
no. I was not going to have a job that involved showing my thighs. Even at 15, I was like, no way. But I ran a restaurant actually, the Big Kahuna Cafe.
Okay.
There's actually a post on our blog about the career lessons I learned from all those summers working at Noah's Ark and from one of the owners, Turk
Oh,
Waterman,
it's
which was his
Noah's
last.
Ark. Okay, you've got to tell because I don't know that
Ah,
much of the audience would necessarily know of Noah's Ark and the whole Wisconsin Dells thing. So give us the
yeah.
as a tee it up. My parents we went to Disney when I was 4, and then other than visiting grandparents in New York, they're workaholics. There were no vacations, and I saved up my caddying money at like 13 and said, "I have enough money. You're going to take me to Wisconsin Dells."
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I grew up in Ames, Iowa, which is about 5.5 hours from the Dells. And the summer I turned 14, my parents bought a summer place up there. And so from the summer I was 15 until I graduated from college, I spent every summer working in the Dells. And from the time I would turn 16 on, I worked at Noah's Ark, America's largest water park, land of the free and home of the wave. So the Waterman family that owned it was very good to me. And when they sold it, I learned about non-compete agreements because they opened an indoor water park, not an competing outdoor water park, but an indoor water park that became Great Wolf Lodge. And they were incredibly generous. They hired me to take care of their kids, like take them to play laser tag and stuff when I wasn't working. And then when they sold Noah's Ark, I worked at their go-kart park and their hula hands. So I learned a lot of career lessons from those summer jobs and from the Waterman family.
Talk about Wisconsin Dells. I mean, it is Americana kish of the just. I mean, what giant foam house.
Yeah, the Xanadu tomorrow, which is gone now, unfortunately. But yeah, there's a song by the Gear Daddies. Do you know that band from Minnesota?
No, I'm
They have
from
a song.
Minnesota.
They have a song called "Dream Vacation in the Dells" that I don't think is on Spotify, but everyone should look up. The Dells. Growing up, I thought it was pretty amazing. I mean, it was a great place to work as a teenager,
Mhm.
and working for the Waterman family was wonderful for me. But yeah, I view it a little differently now, going back as an adult. My husband and I have been watching Ozark, and I would say that it definitely lacks that intrigue, but there are certain things where I'll say like, oh yeah, that's not fiction. But I do. I think that it was great for me to work at a place that had all these young workers and be around all these teenagers and college kids, and it also helped reaffirm for me that there was a big world outside Ames, Iowa. Um, I'm not sure many people would say that about the Wisconsin Dells, but it did that for me.
I feel like you're still underselling it. These are places with like 14 different go-kart tracks, dozens of mini golf courses. It's
They used to have a Dell's worker card for 15 bucks. You get a card and you could do anything for free all summer.
oh wow.
And my little brother figured out that if he wore my Noah's Ark jacket, they would usually let him in for free too.
Huh.
Um, and being a frugal person, I would always try to do everything so I could get my money's worth. So you could go bungee jumping off a crane, and that was one thing crossed off your card. But you could go to all the other water parks and all the go-kart parks. You go ride the ducks, the amphibious vehicles. So yeah, it was a pretty great place to spend your summers.
Okay, Amana colonies.
Oh yeah.
Since I don't know how many Iowa experts we're going to have on this show, we'll close with the Amana colonies.
So if you are driving across Iowa and you are looking for a large meal, you should visit the Amana colonies. They have these family style meals. There's the Amana woolen mills. There's all these different businesses there. But what they're really known for is the restaurants in the Amana colonies. And they're not that far from, you must go there when you visit your brother, right?
Yeah. We will usually go for lunch one of the days, and
Do you go to the Herbert Hoover Museum too?
I have been. So I've been to all of the U.S. Presidential Museum. Well, I've been to all of the modern ones. I've been, and that was the first or second I had been to, and then the pre-modern ones are not part of the official system. They're all independent, and I've been working on those. But yeah, Amana colonies, and it's worth looking up because I mean, it's a traditional German ancestry group but also they run this. If you look at your air conditioner in a motel in the U.S., it's probably going to say Amana on there as well. That it's this manufacturing powerhouse as well. So it's something to.
I spent 2 years living in Cedar Rapids between college and law school, working on political campaigns, and then for a software company. And so we would go see fireworks at the Herbert Hoover Museum and go for lunch in the Amana colonies.
There we go. Who thought we were going to get the perfect Wisconsin and Iowa summer trip? So thank you for joining us tonight, Amy.
Thanks for having me.